doing 2 services and what it meant to do 2 services, etc. But at the end of the day, there were different needs that were met by each of them. Okay, it is 11:05 on my clock, right? So we'll get started. You ready, Dana?
I'm ready.
Okay, so for those of you who are tuning in for the first time in this program, this is a Ushpitzen series where we are contemporizing and inviting members of our congregation who have been involved in the Jewish community nationally and internationally as a way of the community getting to know who's a part of us. You know, like any community, we exist in concentric circles. And so there's a core group that know everybody and what everybody does, etc. And then there are people who are beyond that, core, that center group. And it's very important that we reach out to each other and get to know each other. And in that also, there are people who are well known. You might want to mute whoever's doing the muting. There are people who are part of this community, and their work is not necessarily advertised, publicized. And so what you find is that we have some incredible people doing extraordinary things that are part of the B'nai Torah community. In the case of today's program, Dana Adler is new here. And so it was an opportunity to be able to introduce Dana to the community a little bit to Dana, but just to get to know her and get to know her really important work. And I think it's going to be something that you'll all be very interested in. Dana, what I realized is that when I went through your CV, when I thought about the things that you're doing, that an hour will not do you justice by any means, but this is all part of an ongoing conversation. So you should all know that most recently, Dana has been named the chairwoman of the North American chair of the Ethiopian National Project. And that's a function of her involvement in many, many other areas of Jewish communal work and certainly advocacy for Israel, specifically through Jewish Federations of North America, but not limited to that. Another part of Dana's resume, which is also relatively new and something that we're going to touch on in our conversation, is she also just recently completed a master's degree in social justice at Columbia University. Very different than her early academic work and very different than a lot of the other things that she had done. But her commitment to the causes of our people and then to something much broader than just our people led her to go back to school to get that degree. And we'll have an opportunity to speak about that. So let me go through her CV. I'll go through it quickly, and it would be impossible. It would take up the whole hour for me to touch on everything. But she's on the Jewish Agency for Israel's Board of Governors from 2018 until the present. The Jewish Federation of Northern New Jersey's Board of Trustees also. Women's Philanthropy President from 2016 to 2018, where she has served in many different capacities. She is on the board of directors of the JFNA, the National Women's Philanthropic Board. She's been involved in an organization called Stanton Strong. Actually, involved diminishes it. She's a co-founder. It's a nonpartisan women's rights group geared towards supporting women's healthcare and pro-choice initiatives, both locally, which meant in the New Jersey area, but also throughout the United States. She's been on the Cornell University Hillel Board of Directors and actually continues to serve there. The YPO Peace Action Network champion, where she's worked with Jewish and Muslim spouses for the Jewish and Muslim Spouses Forum from 2003 to 2006, where she mobilized and educated 8 women leaders in conflicts surrounding religion and surrounding the Mideast. That's something we also will talk more about at another time in terms of what's going on and what has been going on locally with the Muslim community. She's been on the AIPAC Senators Club, Adler Aphasia Center. She's got a variety of work experiences in the business world. As I mentioned, she just recently got her master's from Columbia in human rights. She's a graduate of NYU's Stern School of Business, where she has a master's of business administration. Her undergraduate work was done at Cornell, and she is a lifelong learner. And we were speaking about this earlier, that she is in the Barry Fellows Young Leadership Program, where she graduated as valedictorian. Well, that's pretty impressive. She has a whole bunch of awards that she has deservedly won. And so let's go. Let's get into this now. So welcome, and we're all duly impressed by your resume, but I also think we really look forward to hearing from you and seeing that resume grow now that you're a part of this community. And so it's very important that I also say welcome to Boca Raton, to the Jewish community of South Palm Beach County, and welcome to B'nai Torah congregation. We are really happy that you've chosen to be a part of us, and we look forward to our work together.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very humbled to be here, and having you sort of list off my CV. It's kind of wild to listen to it, but I feel like of all those things, my most important role is being a wife and a mother, and I'm so proud of my 3 kids. And they say that you need to model for your kids, so I'm looking forward, and a couple are grown up. One is still in high school, but I'm looking forward to see, you know, what they do in the world, because certainly as far as human rights and social justice, we need that next generation to take the baton.
That's right. It's a good thing to hear. I think that at the end of the day, all of us understand how important our work with our children is and what we model for our children. Before I go on, just to take a quick look, Betty Kane is on now, and she's your fellow Garden State, you know, Jewish activist. But Betty's also living here with us last night, and Betty's was our hero last night. Okay, so I have prepared a number of different questions, and they're going to be covering a lot of the different areas that you have worked in and that you have some thoughts about. And I believe that at the end of this conversation, we're going to get into something really meaty about your generation and the transitions that are necessary to move from a past generation that has done such extraordinary work in the Israel American Jewish community arena. So the other people that I have interviewed so far and that will interview had all gotten involved in Jewish communal work because of both their own personal and family experiences, but also because of the times that we were in. So most of these people went to Israel for the first time in the early 60s. They saw and they fell in love with a very, very different Israel. They also were there in one way or another as American Jews, standing with Israel and advocating for Israel in 1967, living with the great anxieties that created, as well as 1973 and the great challenges of that Yom Kippur War. You're not of that generation. You know, I'm not going to ask you when you were born, but I assume that you don't remember 67, or probably don't remember the 73 war either. So tell us a little bit about what got you involved in the Jewish community and in the decision to become a leader in the Jewish community and work for both Jews worldwide, but in particular to become someone who had a voice in the American Jewish and the Israeli conversation.
So I'm so glad you started there. And I've told this story before, and now I have a more sort of bird's eye view of sort of where I am on the spectrum. I won't give my birthday either, but I'm Generation X. And for those of you who may not know, Generation X is squeezed in between the baby boomers and the millennials. And then after the millennials is Generation Z, which is where my kids fall in. And Generation X is by population quite small compared to the other two. And often our voices get drowned out. But I view myself as sort of a bridge in between, because I've been sitting in a lot of these committee meetings for many, many, many years. And I listen to those of the baby boom generation, and their perspective is so entirely different from the next generation's perspective. But I'll get into that idea a little bit later. As far as my own Jewish journey, I like to say that I sort of grew up twice. I was very influenced by my parents, particularly my mom, who always sort of felt that she grew up as an only child in the Bronx and Manhattan. And her parents never joined a synagogue, and she never was educated Jewishly. And because of that, when she was raising my brother and I, she sort of went almost a little overboard, at least for the time. And through a variety of circumstances, my parents joined an Orthodox synagogue, even though looking back, they said they were sort of observed in the conservative manner, but really they were mostly Reform, if you had to really kind of label it. And so they had a little cheder, a little after-school program at the Orthodox shul. So I grew up within this very sort of very traditional halacha as far as learning, but then at home not quite, you know, living up to that standard, so to speak. Although spiritually, yes. So we were there, but I always sort of led the family as far as, well, you know, they would always ask me, even though I was 10, like, what's the right thing to do? What are we supposed to be doing right now? How does this work? And then at the end of middle school and high school, I joined NCSY, and I was able to spend Shabbatons with this Orthodox community. And even though it wasn't necessarily mine, I learned from it, and I truly enjoyed it. And I loved studying text. And as I got older, I got more involved with the Hebrew school, and I went to Hebrew high school. And then, you know, I got to college, and again, Hillel was not a big deal at Cornell at the time, but I did join a Jewish sorority. I used to go to services when I couldn't go home. And also, by the way, my mom was president of B'nai B'rith, the Shalom chapter of B'nai B'rith. So I saw my mom taking on leadership positions in the community, and that definitely influenced me as well. My grandmother had been involved with ORT. The JCC on the Palisades was being built when I was a teenager and became one of the star JCCs in the country. That had an impact on me. And then I graduated college, and I met my husband almost immediately. And it turns out that he's a little bit older than I am, but he also grew up in Bergen County. I didn't know him growing up, but his parents were very, very successful, greatest generation folks. My father-in-law served in World War II, came back, was on the GI Bill, and finished college. And then he and my mother-in-law started Myron Corp. And it became wildly successful. And so what did they do? They became wildly involved with the community. There's almost nothing that hasn't been touched institutionally, Jewishly, in Bergen County that the Adlers had not been involved in. So throughout my 20s, my husband and I were living in the city without kids, and almost every month, my in-laws, you know, were involved in some charity, black tie event, took out a table. There were 4 children. We each had spouses or significant others, and there was a table of 10. And I thought in my early 20s, well, once, you know, you've made it financially, that's what you do. So those are my examples. And so after several years of that, and, you know, wearing, you know, being very proud and involved and kind of taking it all in, my husband and I moved to London, and we spent 5 years there. And then I also learned, sort of from an international standpoint, what it means to be a Jew, and how special it is to be an American Jew, and how special it is that we have a variety of different ways that we can express our Judaism, as well as certain tax advantages to giving charitably in Jewish ways. They don't have that in Europe. It's very, very different. They have mostly what they call the sinning Orthodox. Most Jews in Europe belong to sort of what we call an Orthodox movement, and they don't necessarily take part in halakha. Many of them have kosher homes and have Friday night dinners, but you know, they go, but they're not necessarily involved. So I learned from my girlfriends in London who live there permanently, kind of how to create a real Jewish home with children, because at that point I had 2 children, and Friday nights became increasingly important, and having a kosher home became increasingly important. And then I moved back to New Jersey, where I was raised, and I made a real commitment, not only to create a Jewish home and Jewish values. I kept kosher at that point. I hadn't in the past. I just wanted it to be a home where it's not only for my own family, but I could open it up to the community, where anyone in the community would feel comfortable. That was very, very important to me. I'm very thankful and blessed that we were able to build a beautiful, large home in New Jersey where we raised our kids. And I kind of started to spend my time in places where my mother and father-in-law had already had some leadership. So I got involved with the Jewish Federation at that point. I got involved with the JCC. And I got involved with other things as well, the Arnold P. Gold Foundation with Humanism in Medicine. And I sort of, followed in their footsteps. And I loved it, every minute of that. And then of course we did the Berry Fellows. Alan is on the call. We became good friends through the Berry Fellows, which was based on the Wexner Heritage Program for Jewish Leadership. Wexner had taken a hiatus at that point, but we got to have the opportunity to have the same scholars, same moderators. We got to study at Shalom Hartman over the summer. And just that learning really solidified my passion. And it just kind of went on from there.
So what you described is an initial involvement that essentially came through family. And so you talked about like the black tie dinners for all the major organizations in Manhattan that you went to as a young adult. But many of your peers and those who are younger don't have that entry point. And so here's the question for you is, what do we have to offer to them? And particularly for those who are not of that status where they go to those, dinners at the Pierre, but rather, they are interested in meaning and interested in values. And so how are we going to take what were the values of that you really are a bridge person, between those generations. So how are we going to take those commitments that we've heard about the last couple nights and that we know about and translate them to your generation and to the next generation?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, I certainly don't have all the answers, but I know that sort of style and the influences that I had is not really working for this next generation. Look, yeah. I mean, to skip forward a little bit, if I may, one of the reasons that I really wanted to go back to school is because for about 20 years, I'd been sitting at these tables and there was such a massive disconnect between this baby boomer generation and this millennial and Gen Z generation and how they view themselves, how they view the Jewish world, how they view Israel. And I really didn't understand it and I didn't have the language. And so what I did was I learned a tremendous amount about what human rights are. I figured, well, people are vilifying Israel for human rights violations. I didn't even understand truly what human rights were. So I knew I wanted to put the Middle East and Israel at its center. And then I decided to write my thesis on the changing relationship between young American Jews and Israel. And so I did my own oral history research, and I interviewed 9 young people between the ages of 20 and 30. And we talked a lot, not only about Jewish philanthropy, but about themselves, about their relationship to Israel, their backgrounds. And the cool thing is that I was really able to gain insight into a huge spectrum. So I interviewed young people who were Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox, and I interviewed people who were unaffiliated, Reform, Jew of choice, Mizrahi, and really, I don't know necessarily, I'm not going to answer your question about philanthropy, but I can answer your question about connection. Mm-hmm. And because we're in a place right now that is so polarized that these young people feel that there's not a good space to have a candid conversation about Jewish identity and about Israel, which I think that we as an institutionally across the board, synagogues, Jewish federations, even the Jewish Agency, need to provide portals so that our young people can feel good about who they are and can explore their questions about relationship with Israel. I mean, don't forget, historically, American Jews were not Zionists. You know, the Pittsburgh Platform in 1885, they clearly said that the Jewish community in America has to be separate from any kind of relationship with Israel. And the idea of Zionism, the ingathering of the exiles, you know, in that. They had their Mount Sinai was at Mount Carmel in California, where you see Moses coming down the mountain at Mount Carmel. So Americans are Zion. You know, we're very unique here. And I think Jews, we don't even understand how unique we are. And then fast forward, you know, after 67 war and after 73, where there was this very precarious existential threat to Israel, then, you know, suddenly American Jews started to pay more attention and become more philanthropic and more Zionist. And then that sort of fell away in 1982, you know, with the Lebanon War and some of the injustices that went on in Lebanon. And that's slowly been eroding. So the idea that Americans are not necessarily all Zionist, it's really not a foreign concept. And if you look back into history, objectively, I say, and I hope I'm not saying anything that's, you know, politically not cool, but, you know, just historically and objectively to say that, you know, we have our own identity, and young people are looking at themselves and their relationship to this country and to Israel very, very differently than previous generations have had, including my own. And I think that in order to understand philanthropically where they stand, we need to understand them a lot better.
So tell us, first of all, then, what motivated you to go into a master's program in social justice, number one, and number two, Columbia is really known as a bastion of kind of liberalism, right? Left-wing politics. And certainly there's been a lot spoken about with Columbia, whether fairly or unfairly, truthfully or not untruthfully, about the Zionist and Israel forces at Columbia. How was your particular thesis greeted by a program in social justice, a master's program in social justice, where your interest in your thesis sounds to me, and from the little that I have read about it, and I promise one day I'll get to it. How does that the interest in Jewish affiliation with Israel, as opposed to a different type of critique of Israel or a different type of examination of Israel, how is that received both by your thesis advisors and by the program itself? So the first question is, why did you choose to go into social justice? And then the second question is, how did this play out for you there?
Well, the program, okay, so here's what happened. So, you know, I guess like most of us, I'm going to admit, I sort of was living in a little bit of a bubble and, you know, very Zionist. My son served in the IDF as a Chayil Boded, a lone soldier. So I was, you know, we're all very proud of him and that, and, you know, I was visiting Israel quite often. And so, but I knew there was a piece missing. I knew there was a piece missing, and I knew I knew I wanted to go back to school. My home in northern New Jersey was 15 minutes from Columbia. So, and I think that I was investigating Columbia particularly because of some of their left-wing liberal views of the world. I wanted purposely to make myself uncomfortable. I wanted to be in a situation where I had to sit back and really think and understand. And so, so then I wasn't sure what department I wanted to be in. So I did some investigating. I looked at Jewish studies, I looked at history, I looked at American studies, nothing quite fit. And then I saw that the head of the Human Rights Institute at Columbia was Israeli. So I figured, wow, I've got an Israeli, somebody on my team, yay. What I didn't realize, of course, is that the gentleman is very far to the left.
What's his name? What's his name?
So it's It's actually Addie Barkin's dad. LSR Barkin is his name. So I called him up and I said, I told him what I was interested in, and he said, look, take a couple classes, because I was able to take classes without being in the program that would sort of be part of my requirements. And I took a class on Israel with a visiting professor from Tel Aviv University, Alberto Speck-Barkowski. And I also took another class in international human rights law. And that was the perfect way to start. So then I wasn't, I had to build my program, and there was a course being offered by Rashid Khalidi, who is very, very, very controversial and one of the topmost Palestinian scholars in our country and very well regarded at Columbia. And I talked to some people who were part of Students Supporting Israel. And I said, would you take a class with with Professor Khalidi? And they said, no, I'd never do that. And when anybody tells me no, I kind of want to do the opposite. So, so I figured I'd give it a shot. And I have to say, even though there's plenty that I don't agree with Professor Khalidi, I found him very accessible, brilliant, and I'm actually, and I learned so much about, the class was on the Cold War, the Middle East, the Cold War, and how the U.S. interacted with Russia and the USSR at the time. And I learned so much. And I wrote my final paper for him on the PLO and Russia, and how all those international actors, it's sort of like, is the tail wagging the dog, or is the dog wagging the tail? How much did Israel and the PLO, and before Israel, of course, the Jewish Agency and others, and the Zionist movement, how much did they manipulate the superpowers, and how much did the superpowers manipulate those actors? So, and who is more successful and why? So I really, I'm very proud that I was able not only to be in his seminar, but to also interact with the students around the table, who I found, again, brilliant and thoughtful. And I definitely got to understand more about, sort of why we're in this predicament as far as BDS on campus and some anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the world.
Were there kindred spirits in the program, or were you kind of standing alone as the Israel advocate?
I was definitely much more standing alone, at least in my classes.
And what was the breakdown in terms of either ethnicity, Palestinians, Jews, etc.?
So a lot of Jewish students, actually, a lot of non-Zionist Jewish students, or I don't want to say anti-Zionist, but a lot of folks who are not advocates of Israel, who are Jewish. It was like one of my first days of class, and I walked into my international human rights law class, and it's a seminar, and there are about 20 odd students, and we went around the table and we said who we were and why we were there. And I thought, I was so nervous in the beginning. I thought, okay, what's going to happen to me here? And then at the very last minute, someone walked in, and she said who she was. She was Palestinian. She grew up in Texas, and she said she was there because of how the oppressors and colonialists have thrown her people out. And I just, I sort of cringed and thought, here we go. But having said that, it only really, we went through the whole semester, and I learned a tremendous amount about international law. And it was only really the last day that there was some contention. And then I heard the words collective punishment for the first time, which, again, it was learning. I have a lot more of the language now, at the very least. Mm-hmm. And I'm very thankful that I got through. I did this program and had the teachers. And as far as my my thesis advisor, so Rebecca Cobrin is her name. She's Orthodox and has 3 kids and lives in Riverdale. And she's an expert on diaspora Jewry. And so having her guide me through this, I mean, she and my other advisor, my academic advisor, they really feel that what I did was some breakthrough research that had not been done before. And, you know, there's been a lot of longitudinal studies and quantitative studies on this subject, particularly now for good reason. But from what I read, and, you know, in my thesis, I talk about this, a lot of the conclusions I think are erroneous.
You think your work will be, will it be invited into the JFNA conversations and local federations? Because it's really an important conversation. All of us who've been, you know, involved in our local communities and advocating for Israel, et cetera, understand these great polls these days and the tensions. So I think it's great that you did it. Can I'm going to pivot, okay? But first, a short commercial. I want to welcome Rabbi Jerry Epstein. He's the former executive of United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism. Jerry, it's nice to see you. Moadim l'simcha. And also, there is the Goldhabers are with us, and the Goldhabers have been very, very involved in the Ethiopian National Project. I think it was the Ethiopian National Project. Is that correct, Sandy and Miriam? Is it the ENP? You're muted, and you're not.
No.
What's yours?
The same organization Jerry is with a North American Conference on Ethiopian Jewry.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Dana deals with high school age kids, and we deal with first, second, and third graders.
Okay. Thanks. It's good to see you, by the way.
Thank you.
Okay. So Dana, let's pivot to the work with the Ethiopian National Project, how you got involved in that. What is the status? What's happening right now? Not just with the North American organization that supports it, but tell us a little bit about A, your involvement with it, and B, what's going on right now, and C, now that you're in a new community, you know, community that's always picking up new projects. And that's, Sandy, don't worry, this will not be in opposition to bringing in your people also. How does a local community get involved in this important need? And this, when you talking about social justice, you know, there's a call here also. So,
yes. So you know, I was tapped to be North American chair. I took over from Bobby Goldberg, who was in the position for a long time. He's former head of UJC. And I had been to Ethiopia in my first National Young Leadership Cabinet mission in 2007, I think it was. So I left 3 very little kids behind and went to a third world country. A lot of my friends thought I was insane. But again, I had only learned about the Ethiopian community from my mom, who just, you know, would say, you know, there's this community and they weren't discovered until a couple hundred years ago. And there was this incredible airlift. And you know, at the time, it was, I think, Operation Moses. I was in high school, and Operation Solomon, I was in college, and, you know, kind of in my own little bubble at that point. So didn't really know too much about the community, but somehow always had this affinity towards it. And so I jumped at the chance in 2007 to go. And it really was life-changing. Being on the ground in Ethiopia, the people, beautiful smells of the earth, the coffee rising up in the mist in the morning, going to Gondar, where there's not too many roads, seeing the shepherds, the young shepherds, 7, 8, 9 years old, barefoot, seeing the girls carrying the water from the well on their back like they did in biblical times. And then seeing them in the sort of camps in Gondar and Addis Ababa, and they're longing for Yerushalayim. And then, you know, he got to bring back 71 Olim into Israel. So we made that journey with them from Ethiopia to Israel, and they were all, you know, in their Sunday best, and it was it was midnight when we went to the consulate in Addis Ababa, and they all had, you know, their belongings on their heads. And at one point, you know, one of my friends on the mission said, let's help them. And so we started grabbing their belongings and helping them. And you know, just to see them being on the plane and then the kids, you know, playing with the music and the earphones that were given out. It was a transformative, probably my most transformative journey that I'd ever been on. And that stayed with me for a long time. And then of course, you know, being involved with JFNA and being involved with the Jewish Agency, I'm on a subcommittee for the Aliyah, because there's still about 8,000 Ethiopians who are hoping to make Aliyah. I think that the government just approved another 2,000. So we're still bringing them in. But then the point is, and the question is, you know, they've been coming in since the 80s. What's happening with this community? And I'm so happy that there are folks in here from the NACOACH, because they have incredible programs. ENP has 3 programs that we like to highlight. First of all, it's a partnership between Jewish Federations, the Jewish Agency, the Joint Distribution Committee, and I believe World Ort is part of us, as well as JNF, as well as there's an umbrella organization of Ethiopian Jews in Israel. So they sit in our board as well. And we work with the Israeli government. So we're all working together. And the original charter for the ENP was a partnership between ENP, the government of Israel, and World Jewry. So you have these folks coming in, and you know, they have tremendous successes. They also have some issues. They have issues, interestingly, that are similar to the issues in this country. And nobody likes to talk about this, but I'm just going to say it. There's racism in Israel, and it's a problem. And so, you know, you've got this community where, you know, you've got folks who've made it, folks who, my son's senior officer is Ethiopian. So the idea behind the space program that ENP helps operate is to get kids between the ages of 13 and 18 enough of their education so that they can be successful and gain their matriculation certificate and then gain entrance into the IDF. So that's one program. And we have metrics that show that it's incredibly successful. Our graduates, there's an 81% matriculation rate versus the general Israeli population that has a 73% matriculation rate. So space has been shown to be incredibly effective. Another program that I'm super excited about is the TIUD program. And TIUD is the Jewish Ethiopian Heritage Program. So, you know, you've got sometimes second, third, sometimes fourth generations that have already been in Israel. I was talking to somebody from a foundation about this, and a lot of these kids and grandkids and great-grandkids have never been to Ethiopia. So somebody was with a group of teenage girls and said, if you could go any place in the world right now, where would you go? And they all said they'd go to Ethiopia. And so the idea is to create, we have this program that helps these young teenagers to learn about their own histories. They're trained to do oral histories with people in their family. And then they put these stories together in a book, and they also share them. And there was actually a virtual sharing with a couple hundred of them on Facebook Live last year. So, so the idea is we have this incredible program in place so that the Ethiopian kids themselves can learn about their very inspirational stories. But at the same time, we would love to take these stories and get them out to young Americans to learn about yet another successful Jewish story that will inspire them, and to the Israeli population as a whole. So that, you know, there's been so many great stories about survival and struggle and this longing for Yerushalayim and Israel and Zion. And to be able to tell that Ethiopian story, it's such a proud story. It's the only group of Africans that came to another country not in bondage, and to tell that as full citizens, and to tell that story is just, it's a beautiful thing. So that's one of the programs we're working on as well. And then the third program, of course, is our Bridges program. And Bridges is about teaching them English, because really English is the language of business and tech and finance. And so, and also, you know, there's a big program through the Jewish Agency for Shlichim, and we've just talked about Colombia, and it's how it's a hotbed, and they just passed a BDS resolution there. In order for us to get our kids to, it's almost like, often you can make an analogy that it's almost like going into battle, to help our college students get some armor, get into battle, and to see what's going on these hotbed college campuses. We need more proud shlichim, emissaries from Israel, to help us to educate both sides. And the Ethiopian kids, young people, can really do a tremendous job. So they have to learn English in order for them to come here, obviously. So we're trying to get that pipeline, you know, between the space program, get them matriculated, and to learn about their heritage, and then of course to learn English. These are three incredibly successful programs that I'm very excited to promote.
Last night in our conversation with Betty, one of the things that we landed on was the critical importance of the individual stories. So there are, you know, overarching projects that we work on, but the individual stories and the people that you meet are what most profoundly inspire you and inspire other people too. Just a very like contemporary question right now. So we know in the United States, the underserved populations, poor people, and the African-American community has been hit much harder by COVID than other populations. In Israel, we know that there's a disproportionate number of Haredim that have been hit by COVID for a whole host of other reasons that probably don't have to do as much with poverty as it does philosophical and ideological choices that are made about being separate, wearing masks, etc. What's happened with the Ethiopian population in Israel in relation to COVID right now? Do you know?
You know, I had this conversation, I was on the phone with my EMP folks early this morning. I don't know if the Ethiopian community has been hit harder than anybody else. I can't answer that question in particular. But what's happening is, because of the lockdown, you know, there's fewer Ethiopian kids who have access to computers and online learning. So that's a big problem. And I was just, in the course of our conversation, I learned that often when they're trying to identify gifted Ethiopian youth who could potentially become shlichim in America, that, you know, in order to get them into that groove, they're setting up email accounts for them. They don't even have email accounts. That's a problem. And that's not so much a function of the actual pandemic, but I think it's a function of, you know, the priorities. They're often, you know, this is a small community of 150,000 people that is often forgotten. And so one of the terrific things that ENP does is lobby tremendously for this community and identifying some of these issues. I mean, look, I live here in Delray Beach, and we have a significant Black community here, and it's the same. Like, these kids don't even have Wi-Fi, and they're trying to learn virtually. How are they going to do that? So, you know, there's a lot of crossover.
Well, there's a big space here for you to walk in this community to, you know, create more involvement on behalf of, you know, both on behalf of the ENP and the Ethiopian community, but also to get our community more involved with it. So that's important for you to note as you enter here. What are your plans for over the next year, besides singing with Cantor Fishman?
So
I don't know.
can we make any plans right now? That's the question. I don't, I'm starting to get more and more comfortable doing my Zoom meetings and Zoom calls and trying to move the needle. I have, my son is right now in Boston. He's studying physics and math. He just finished Brandeis and he's doing graduate work right now. He's applying to PhD programs in physics. So we'll see where he
was
goes.
Was this the lone soldier?
The lone soldier. My daughter, Caroline, she's a junior at Syracuse. And she is supposed to be going abroad next semester. And of course, we don't even know if that's going to happen. And so, just to make a little plug, the Jewish Agency has an amazing program called Masa. So for any of you parents or grandparents out there and you have, older grandchildren or children, Masa has special visas for our youth to go and spend time there. So yes, they likely will have to quarantine. Look, everybody's on lockdown now, but God willing, that won't last forever. But there are special visas for Masa students. Or young people to come in. So yes, they'll have to quarantine for 2 weeks, but then, they could be in Israel for 4 to 6 months. So I know for my daughter, if Plan A falls through, she said to me, Mommy, I really love you, but can't live with you anymore. So we might send her on a Masa program. So that's a terrific option. And, as far as me and my husband and my little one who's in high school down here, we're just, every day we're just, we're doing our thing. We're very blessed to be here. We're humbled to be here. This is a wonderful community. People are friendly. The food is good. We were so inspired by the virtual services and your sermons, yours and Rabbi Englander's sermons, and Cantor Fishman's voice was extraordinary. So we're very honored and humbled to be part of this community. And, we have a lot of energy. So we hope that we can make friends and do good things and move the needle and better the world.
Sounds good to me. I thank you for your time. I look forward to the day where we can all welcome you in person. You really have a great deal to be proud of. You've accomplished a lot, and obviously there's a world out there, and there's a local community that will continue to need you and your inspiration. So again, thank you very much. Chag Sameach, Moedim L'Simcha, and we look forward to all of us being together. Does anyone, Chag Sameach. Does anybody have
questions?
If you have a question, just unmute yourself, please.
So I do want to also point out that Alan Gallatin is on with us, and those of you who don't know Alan is Ron and Meryl's son. Tomorrow, Ron and Meryl will be our guests in this last of our Ushpitzen series for this year. But I also hope that to the members of our congregation, I hope that we can continue to do this with other members of the congregation who've had really, who have important things to say and have done important work. And it's a great way for us to get to know each other.
I just want to say this was most inspiring. And I am sure that you know that our federation greets Grace, Grace.
From the NP, great.
Rodniski. Yeah. From the ENP every year, and there is no one more passionate than her until I heard you. So we support the ENP and the people around the table of the overseas, the Israel Overseas Committee, of which you were a member, Rabbi, are always very inspired by her presentation, by the programs that that we are supporting through the ENP, through Grace. So
yeah, I think Grace,
thank you for the program.
Grace was here a number of years ago. She spoke at B'nai Torah also. Yeah.
Yes, she says hello. She says a big hello. I spoke with her this morning.
Yeah, she's wonderful. We missed her this year, but she's wonderful. So passionate, as you are.
Rabbi Steinhardt?
Yeah, Jerry.
Yeah.
Rabbi Epstein.
Let me just follow up on the issue of the internet and computers. Right now with the lockdown, we found that it's not only, we were able to get tablets to and iPads to most of our students through a generous grant. The problem was not that they didn't have the iPad. So we got them the iPads. The question is, okay, where's the internet? Where's the help? The parents at home can't help them. And this community and what ENP is doing, what NACOJ is doing is important. But what it really needs is the help to also get to the parents so that they can help them. If you look at Israeli children who have grown up in Israel, the Israeli parent is a lot like the Jewish parent here who nurtures their child and helps them along and can help them. The Ethiopian parents don't usually have that ability, and therefore it's the nurturing that is really needed. And hopefully this community and other communities will help not only the children, but the parents as well.
So Dana, do you know if PACT still exists, Parents and Children Together? It was a program of the agency?
Actually, it's a program of the GDC, actually.
Oh. Does it still exist, Betty?
And it is still, yes, and the major focus was actually the Ethiopian community. Right. And I've attended a few of them, participated with the parents and the children. And it was really interesting to understand why they don't have that kind of a connection at the educational level. They don't actually play. It's not something that they did in Gondar. It is playing with toys with their children. And that is really part of the growth as well. So it was a very interesting session to attend. And PACT is still going on. Yeah, thank you for reminding us of that, Rabbi.
Yeah, that's a very impressive program. Anyway, have a good day, everybody. I appreciate your time, and we will be together again soon. Dana, take care, and good luck.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Thank you for having me. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you. This was very inspiring. Thank you so much.
Great program.
Thank you, Dana. Welcome to the community.
Thank you.
That was from the president of B'nai Torah, Dana. Ed Sopher, where are you? There you are. Yeah. Right here. And his wife is there also, Roseanne, who's the president of our Women's League. And our Women's League is very engaged in different types of social action projects also. Those of you who are still on, who are local and have not come and delivered food yet on this Sukkot, please come, bring a carload of dry goods and canned goods. We're doing pretty well, but we haven't reached our goal yet of 10,000 pounds.
Great seeing you again, Dana.
All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Wrap it up. See you tomorrow.
Yeah, Alan.